With more than 25 years of being a CEO and founder, James Lawrence loves to share his insights on leadership, organizational culture, and the intersection of technology in the workplace. He believes the cornerstone of every successful organization is its people. He's the co founder and CEO of Happy Companies, a startup that uses technology to deliver AI enhanced coaching. So, we're going to get into that. Happy revolutionizes the way that organizations encourage improved communication, collaboration, and engagement with their employees at scale. So, here to share his mission of having people love their work and get connected with their teams, please welcome to the podcast, James Lawrence. Welcome to the Engaging Personalities Podcast. I'm Anders Belanger, founder and CEO of Engagify, where we're on a mission to rehumanize business through engagement. We believe that we can all be more successful if we can command attention and deepen connection. So stick around to the end of the show and we'll reveal how you can be our next guest on a future episode. So let's get ready to engage.
Well, I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So we were just kind of talking a little bit beforehand, and then I shut us down because I said, no, let's capture that. So there's a couple of things. So one of them, you said in your background, you were the chair of one of the largest trade shows out there. You want to kind of speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, it comes from living a different life here for the last 20, 30 years in the automotive industry. But now I was most recently chairman of the board of SEMA, which is a large trade association that represents the automotive aftermarket. And it's been really an exciting tenure. So I've been on the board since 2016. And of course, the SEMA trade show itself is one of the largest trade shows in the United States. So
it is massive, like full Las Vegas Convention Center. We work with our client Shop Monkey at that to do shop management software. And it's a different, normally I'm wearing a suit at all of the other shows I go to, and then they're like, no suits, man, that's not going to fly. And it's like, okay, so I dress it down once a year, just because, we don't want to, we want to connect with people. And I think that's kind of what we're going to be talking about here too. But that also makes sense, you revealing that to me, because one of my first questions was, like I said, before we start our engines, I was going to say, you race cars, right? Like, or what kind of, something in your bio about 200 miles an hour.
Fast. That came from just being in the automotive industry for the time. Since I was 16, I just fell in love with automobiles and just fell in love with the magic of the car. And so have been, racing, driving. If you don't find me at a racetrack, it's,
So what kind of racing? What kind of
drag
cars?
Racing, mainly.
Drag racing?
So we've won a couple of championships drag racing, but I also race circle track and have road raced. And I'm not particularly good at turning corners. I'm better at going straight. But if it's got an engine or even an electric motor and it goes fast, I'm into it. So now I've peeled off the racing part a little bit. Now I'm learning how to fly. So I've traded engines for engines in the air and airplane wings. So that's been entertaining.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've got some fascinating hobbies. That's excellent. So now what I find interesting, and I kind of want to go back on your background before we start talking about the Happy Company. How, you went from cars and now we're talking about AI and a platform for, managing teams and collaboration and all of that kind of stuff. There seems to be a bit of a jump, because when I think of, I don't want to use the term grease monkey, but you're working on cars. That's technology. That's, the mechanics, but it's a little bit different than a platform and AI and all of that. So kind of rewind us back. How did you come to this point?
I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. And so, even from very early age, using digital technology, ran a media business that was one of the first to kind of break down the digital frontier from print. But I had a couple of software startups in my early 20s. So I've been involved in the kind of techish space, even though it's been a little more leaning toward automotive. But, my experience, I mean, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. I mean, you need to apply technology and people in virtually any industry, right? I mean, I don't know anybody that is in the tissue paper industry, but I'm certain that, technology and people are behind tissue paper at
Yeah.
some level. And so, really, my latest kind of last few years with Happy has been born more from, my kind of trajectory as a CEO, if you will. Just the challenges as a young CEO. I was in my early 20s, and I was, managing 60 to 100 employees. And, there's a real learning curve to leading people.
Hmm.
I work with a lot of CEOs now and a lot of business leaders with Happy, and it's really funny. I mean, you get to the point where you can talk AI and technology and all this stuff. And then the minute you start getting to talking about someone's team, and they go, yeah, my team, the people, it's like people are a pain in the ass. We're not like, we're not easy to check off. We're not a check box or,
Yeah.
spreadsheet.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think of, you're probably familiar with EOS, right? Entrepreneur
Yeah.
Operating System. People is a piece of that six, I don't know, pie or whatever you want to call it, the around the wheel. And systems is another piece, right? Where, where you get the data in the systems, and that's kind of where that technology arrived. Oh, and the processes, procedures, that kind of thing. That is checkboxes, like you're saying, but people are dynamic. They're different. They're, uh, well, living, breathing people, obviously. So what I want to know too is, have you always been a real people person, and been that helped you get through leadership, or is that something that evolved over time, as you went through your career?
I mean, I figured out how to lead people wrong about every way possible. So, you know, by no means am I going to come from a position of standing up and saying, "Hey, I cracked the code at 25, some kind of mythical, beast, was felled, and I can magically lead every person." I mean, I think, you know, learning how to lead, there are definitely natural leaders, but learning how to lead is something that can be done.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
anybody, if they're committed to it, can learn how to adapt into being a great leader of people. It takes intention, it takes work, it takes effort. I mean, just like becoming good at anything does. But I think it starts with intention. For me, in my early and mid 20s, I had some real blind spots as a leader. I would say I had some natural leadership skill. I had a good ability to communicate. I said the wrong thing a lot. And so while I might have been an effective communicator, I didn't really understand what it meant to be a servant leader, what it meant to really lift people up, and the understanding that a good CEO is there to support, the team and not the other way around. And so, that was a big learning curve for me. And so, but I've always been passionate about understanding, how do you get an organization to perform better? Whether you have 10 people or 100, or, earlier today, I was talking to C-level executive of a national university that had 40,000 employees. And, how do you lead people at scale? How do you,
Hmm.
how do you accelerate people performance? I mean, it's always kind of been something that's fascinated me.
I think that's a good segue to talk about happy, right? Just this idea of turning your workforce, your human resources into a competitive advantage. What are some of the problems that Happy solves? For these CEOs, whether it's 40,000 employees or something just maybe in the hundreds. What kind of headaches is it going to remedy?
So when I first started Happy, I was like, I think I was having a beer with a friend, and he goes, tell me about what you're starting. And he had I think a background in medical devices. And he said, you know, I don't know about this because, I know that, there's always going to be people are going to have medical problems. And I kind of laughed and I said, I'm pretty sure people problems are going to be around right around as long as medical problems are going to be. I mean, I don't like couching it as a problem. I guess the first thing I would like to say is, like, we're not solving a problem. I think, at the end of the day, managers, most managers want to learn how they can become more effective. And I
Mhm.
think the relationship between managers and individual contributors is the most important relationship in the organization. I mean, it's more important than your mission statement and all the other stuff that's important, because if your relationship with your manager is wrong, you're not going to stay, you're not going to be happy. And that's just the data will show you that. And so, really intentionally working on the manager, employee relationship is, I think, the most important thing that Happy does. And along with that, that comes with healthy communication, collaboration. And I would say then it comes to working with your team, understanding, how do I work with my team more effectively? How do I communicate with my team more effectively? How do I resolve conflicts? And also from the individual contributor standpoint, it's not just the manager. We hear from employees all the time that go, I would really like to understand what motivates my manager, or I want to understand how to communicate with my manager, or even something simple like I have to pitch an idea to my boss. How do I do that more effectively?
Mm.
And so those are the things that Happy does kind of at scale in an organization. And so the way it works is pretty simple. Happy is modeled on behavioral science. And so we learn how everybody in the organization likes to work and communicate with just through a brief 5-minute assessment. And then we're able to deliver AI enhanced coaching to the entire organization at scale that's personalized and contextualized.
Oh, okay. Let's just slow down, because I think there's going to be a lot of cool stuff coming out here. And
Okay.
I'm trying to
slowing down.
think, hang those questions in my mind as we go, but I'm like, no, I'm going to interrupt you and talk to you. So this 5-minute assessment, it's going to be a little bit, like personality assessments, like you see a Myers-Briggs or a DISC or something like that, maybe, so that people, you understand how they think, how they like to be communicated to, right? That's what you're saying, I think. And then, so when the coaching tips and the information coming from the platform to them, it is then reframed through the lens of where their assessment landed them. Is that what you're saying with that?
Man, you described it better than I do.
No, I think I just said
That's
what you
good.
just said.
No,
But I
no.
just think that's fascinating, because that's golden rule kind of thing, right? Or actually not golden rule, platinum rule. Golden rule is treat others as you'd like them to treat you, but platinum rule is treat others as they want to be treated, right? And that's what you're doing to the platform.
Yeah, so great. So our underlying methodology and technology is based on DISC. So we do use DISC. We've built our own behavioral science for a couple reasons, but it is modeled on DISC. And so it's exactly what you said. I mean, how do I learn how to communicate better with my boss? Well, if you and I were working together, and let's say we had another employee, let's just call her Laura. We were working with Laura, and someone said, hey, you need to have a better meeting with James. Okay. Well, you wouldn't want to give Laura generic advice. When you gave Laura advice on how to have a good meeting with me, you'd want to consider how Laura naturally communicates. And I usually like to explain it like this. Happy does the work for you to help you improve your work relationships. And in most companies, you're just left to do it on your own.
Yeah.
Like most companies are not giving you any resources, tools, or coaching to help you navigate your work relationships. And that's what Happy does, and does it, pretty affordably. So if, for example, I'm a big picture thinker and I like big ideas, and Laura is an analyst that likes details and statistics and data, one of the things it would say is, hey, you've got a meeting with James tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Make sure when you meet with James, you dream with him for a while. And, if he presents you any ideas, hear him out and dream with him for a little while before asking him a ton of questions.
Yeah.
Right. Now, let's say Laura's my boss,
Okay.
and I'm the big picture thinker and Laura's the detail person, it would say something like, hey, James, when you pitch Laura an idea, make sure you bring some fact and figures with you.
Mm-hmm. And now let's say Laura, we're still using this Laura. She's coming to you. You're the boss. Okay. Is Happy telling you anything about her coming in?
Yeah, of course. So
okay. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, so it's bi-directional. So you've got contextualized coaching at scale. And so you can imagine if you had a company with 10 people, or if you had a company with 100 or 1,000. I was just demoing Happy earlier to a COO that has, like I said, 40,000 people in a educational in a university, and you start thinking about how do you deliver meaningful change at scale.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, we don't compete with human coaches. In fact, we think human coaching is the gold standard, but nobody's going to hire 40,000 leadership
Right.
coaches. And so the question becomes, how do you support and enhance the human coaching work that we're doing in human capital? And how do we enhance that with technology in a way that the organization can see meaningful ROI from it?
Mm-hmm.
Because, we have lots of partners that run coaches and consultants, but, coaches and consultants aren't $6 a month, right? They're, considerably more than that. And so, the question becomes, how do you create meaningful change in a way that an organization can justify it from an ROI standpoint and invest in their people? And you're still probably going to have leadership coaches for up and comers and maybe your leadership team or maybe certain
Right.
positions, but nobody's going to employ coaches for the whole entire organization at once.
Yeah, and I think too, when you train someone, let's say you did train someone on DISC or what, right? And they understand the different personalities and how to communicate, the different styles, but then still they need to apply that. They need to practice that. They need to keep it top of mind. And with the Happy platform, it seems like it's always riding shotgun with you as you collaborate and as you communicate with everyone, right? So I think that it's a nicer way to deeper learning, because after a while that training is going to fade off and then you're going to train again. But this is consistent over time, company wide.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that because I'm now writing down all of the quotes you give me. Happy is riding shotgun with you. This is good stuff. I think I'm getting more from you than you're from me.
Okay, well, here's the thing. We'll talk about this afterwards, but I mean, I work with companies on messaging at trade shows, right? What we say has to engage people and make them, it has to have that what's in it for me, makes them stop and take notice and understand it in such a bite-sized quote that they give me, a minute of their time to see if we can upsell their time and attention and take them on that deeper journey of the booth. So when I'm reframing and I'm listening to it, and I'm just like, yeah, no, like, and then I get excited about it too. So I can send you the recording. You don't have to jot down anything there, James. Will
that was a good one though.
We should have kept your AI note taker going. We kicked your note taker out of the call, but that's all right.
You did.
Like we can transcribe it if you like. All right. Well, this is cool. This is neat. So, I mean, we've got the communication style thing. Now let's talk a little bit. I think there's some engagement. There's some, other pieces to it. So it's just not about the relationship piece. What are some of the other features that Happy has that helps companies, connect and build their teams?
Yeah, one of the things that our research indicated was this is going to sound a little awkward at first, but there's a lot of good assessments out there. And you'd reference DISC and Myers-Briggs. And the truth is that I'm not saying that one assessment, might have differences. I'm not saying there aren't differences from each other. But the reality is that the assessment, whatever the assessment is really not the magic. It's really not the secret sauce. I mean, it's really what you do with the assessment. So if you were even a human coach, I would say, I don't really care what assessment you're using. How good's the facilitator? Like, how good is the coach at working with the employee, or how good is that coach at working with the leader or the CEO? And I would say that, like, okay, maybe this assessment isn't as good as this assessment, but this facilitator, this coach is phenomenal. Well, great coaching is way more important than whatever the brand of assessment you're using is. And I would say the same goes for a tool like Happy. It isn't so much the assessment itself, but it's how are we applying it? How applicable is it to the employee, the company as a whole, the team, the leader? How can they use what we're providing in order to upskill themselves, to improve their relationship, to do self-development? And so what we found in our research is delivering these things in the flow of work is just significantly more effective than any other method of delivery. So that would mean that the specific, how easy can we make it? How convenient can we make it? And so we deliver our coaching through Slack, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, email. The absorption rate for an employees have a million things to do. They got a million things going on. And so you got to make it where it's convenient and easy, and it's accessible for people.
Right.
And
So
then,
it's it's a real-time nudge happening with whatever communication tool they get, right? That is kind of guiding their hand, if you will, in
yeah,
the
a
day-to-day.
nudge or an
Yeah.
insight would be, I mean, it
Yeah.
can't be long, right? Because the thing is that we're continuously trying to deliver these things. So, you know, our research, like I said, you'd be surprised in the middle of a work day how much someone wants to consume is not a substantial amount of information. It's like, even if I'm going to go into a meeting with you,
Yeah.
how much am I going to consume before I walk into a meeting? Well, it's much
Mhm.
less than you might guess. I have a billion things on my mind, and I need to know two things about how to communicate with you. I don't have time to read a book. I don't have
Yeah.
time to read a 10-page assessment. I just need to know that you're going to come on strong and you like choices. And that's really valuable. Or like, I want to know that you like data and you like to take your time when you make a decision. So what am I going to do? I'm going to come to a meeting because you're my boss, and I'm going to make sure that I'm going to give you the data you want, right? I'm going to give you a couple of data points, maybe a
Yeah.
study, and then I'm probably not going to press you for an answer,
Hmm.
right? Because if I need to know that you want to take some time, I might say something like, when do you think would be a reasonable amount of time for us to make a decision on this?
Yeah.
So this isn't rocket science.
No, but it's how it's applied is so brilliant, from my perspective, because I love that example you said, that person coming on strong, right? I know some people, if you got two people in a room together that are just opposite personality types, the person who comes on strong is just going to overwhelm that other person who might be sensitive to that kind of, let's call it aggressive behavior or whatever.
Yeah.
That person is going to go home hating their job, hating that person, right? Just all of those things. And if they go in with understanding how they need to communicate to the other, I can just imagine having those couple pointers from Happy coming to you. You go in, you go, oh yeah, this guy comes on strong. That's how he's wired, right? That's to be expected. Don't take that personally, right? Just as that warning. And meanwhile, that person's got a nudge from Happy of not to come on so
Yeah, right.
strong.
But no, we're working
And
both sides of it. To your
right,
point.
we're working,
Of
but you
course,
the
yeah.
bidirectional you talked about. So you're settling out these extremes and meeting in a hopefully a happy medium, right? And I just think that as far as a conducive work environment, how much better that could make someone's experience, right? Just loving their job in a sense, just not going home crying and complaining to their spouse about this a-hole at work, right? Kind of thing. So yeah.
Well, to your point, I mean, I think that's kind of something that's really fascinating about this is that there is no like perfect software. There's no perfect work
Mhm.
relationship. I mean, we're messy. Humans
Yeah.
are, we're, working with anybody that's married or has been in a relationship knows like, hey, it's not all roses, right? And
Mhm.
so, a work relationship's no different. There are no perfect work relationships. And it's funny to me because we talk to so many leaders, whether they're HR leaders or CEOs or business managers of teams. And one of the funniest things that we get back is like everybody thinks that like their own situation is like unusual, that like people are really hard to work with. It's like, God, this is so hard, and it's like it's everybody's got the same thing. Like we're all messy, right? Like we have different motivations, different generations. I mean, you really want to get like a CEO fired up. So you're talking about Gen Z, and it's really funny. Like it's all about perspective, right? It's like there's all kinds of different flavors of people. And our job as leaders is to meet people where they're at. But at the same time, as an employee, it's also, I think, in your best interest to understand your manager a lot better. Like it's kind of like a cheat code to your manager.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so these are really important things, right? And but anyways, it's funny, we were talking about Gen Z, and I had a leader of a pretty large team say, like, gosh, uh, you know, Gen Z's looking for work-life balance. They want to leave in the middle of the day, go skateboarding for 2 hours and go to the store and get boba drinks and like all this, stereotypical stuff. And I kind of laugh and I'm like, this is really funny because everybody that I know that's 40 to 60 talks about the importance of work-life balance. But then we're complaining about Gen Z for actually living the work-life balance. It's like, well, work-life balance is important, but how can you leave 2 hours in the middle of the workday? It's like, well, that's what work-life balance is. Like, so you're pissed because they're actually doing what you're talking about.
Right,
Well,
right.
stuck at work.
Yeah, we're kind of more about work while there's work and play while there's play, but try to even those out, but don't intermix the two. That's not cool, right? Like that's it's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So there's something when I was doing some research, there's something that I read and I like the quote. And it started off saying something about authority doesn't come from a title. Where does it come from and speak to that and what that piece is all about.
This comes from a funny story, actually. When I was in my early 20s, I was a very, very young leader. And I think I had maybe 20 or 20 people, 25 people on my team. And we had just promoted a manager that probably wasn't ready to be promoted, but pretty intelligent young woman. And she came into my office after about 3 months and she said, I don't remember what her title was because it's 25 years ago, but I was young. So we were both young. And she was some kind of production manager of a creative team. And she said, nobody will listen to me. And I listened and I said, but you're the manager, right? Like that's supposed to be some kind of like anointed holy water, right? And then she's like, I know, but like they didn't listen to me before and they don't even listen to me now. What can you do about it? And of course, I tried to do something about it, which was not really the right thing to do. It turns out that people have to actually build their own authority and their own agency. But, it comes to this bigger thing, which is, really genuine leadership has nothing to do with your title. It has nothing to do with your title. In fact, just because people say you're in charge doesn't really mean anything. I mean, you have to earn that. And that's through trust, respect, and frankly, just coming back to happy, it's through effective communication, collaboration, listening, taking the time to understand the people in your team. Like that is a big thing. And so, that's where leadership and authority spring from is, I don't really love the word authority, but, I think it is a word that is interesting, which is like, what is your ability to inspire others to do things, right? Well, it's not the power you have.
Mm-hmm. Because when you get into that, when again we're talking about authority, but there's really almost that executive presence piece in that too, right? Like this kind of how you go about doing you that makes people want to listen, that makes people want to follow you or inspire others to take it to the next level, in terms of that leadership. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there because when we teach, sales teams, we teach engineers on engagement, creating engagement. So people pay attention to what they say. That authority piece has to be in there. Now you're right. It's not the title, but how they carry themselves, how they speak about things. There's a lot of, nonverbals that go into that,
Oh, yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And some of that's hard to
Authenticity.
teach, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think authenticity, is a big thing. But it comes down to kind of what you said is like, what's your setting? Is your setting speaking to a customer?
Yeah.
Is your setting speaking to a coworker? Is it speaking to somebody that works underneath you? And there's a lot, I think, to be said for learning effective techniques to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no more effective technique than being authentic and, some of these, what I would call core building blocks that I think are really essential when it comes to leading people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Yeah. Authenticity, it's not a technique. It's kind of an untechnique in a sense,
Right.
right? Like let's it's not that. Okay, no, that's a good one. Let's use that. No, you just be yourself. So James, tell me a little bit about, like, let's say someone's listening to this, they go, hey, this happy thing sounds interesting. What's a good fit for, size of company, that sort of thing? Is there kind of a minimum number of
No, I mean, yeah, you
seats?
can go to happycompanies.com. You can get a free account. You can learn your work style, how you like to work and communicate. I would say anything from a company that has 10 or 15 people on the low end to enterprise clients. So it's pretty scalable. I mean, that's the thing is that the good news is people have people problems no matter how big your company is.
Yeah.
I thought, when we first, this is probably 5 or 6 years ago, when we first started researching Happy, I had a friend that worked for one of the, FANG, big tech companies.
Hmm.
I guess I had in my head, like, hey, the big five, like they've got this figured out, right? Like if you're in that holy trinity of technology, and he's the one, he's the first one telling me, he's like, man, like people are just left to themselves. They're gonna fend for themselves. Work relationships are just totally up to, the employee. And, I guess my perception was, bigger companies have this better figured out. And what I really learned was it's way more difficult to build a culture in a large organization. I mean,
For sure.
just
Yeah.
exponentially more difficult. And it isn't intentional, but big companies really need to be intentional about the energy that they put into their work relationships. And it's hard to do, right? It's not easy to do. If you have 1,000 employees spread over
Hmm.
4 states, even just 1,000, that's a big, heavy lift.
Yeah. You're probably familiar with Tony Hsieh's book, Delivering Happiness, where,
Very
he
much so.
talks about, yeah, and just trying to get people mixing and how they moved to the Las Vegas city hall, the old city hall, and wanted people just creating that work culture, but yeah, you get to a certain size and now you can't have them all in a room and listen to the CEO, right? You have to, there's limitations and stages and levels of how you kind of how you disseminate that, how do you still capture that. But yeah, I love the scalable. So I think like the bigger the company, the more they need this is kind of
Yeah,
what
for
what
sure.
I'm hearing and what I
Yeah.
see. Yeah, that's cool. All right. Is there, now you do a bit of speaking and other things as well?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy speaking on leadership topics.
I
Leadership
can
something.
tell.
Yeah, leadership something I really like to talk about. Entrepreneurship, innovation. These are kind of like my favorites. Of course, cars. Um,
And cars.
and cars. Got to add cars in there. But no, I mean, I really have a passion for. I spent a very good part of my career not leading the way that I was capable of.
Mhm.
And I have learned how to be a more effective communicator and a leader. And I think if there's anything that I would leave people with, it's the idea that you can absolutely work on this. Like this is a muscle
Yeah.
that you can build if you care, if you're intentional, if you want to develop it. Leadership's within your grasp. Managing people, leading people, it's absolutely a learned skill.
Yeah. One last question, because that just sparked something for me too. Is in terms of, we always talk about moving the needle, right? And what are the needles that are actually being moved with Happy? Like, what are some of the measurables that companies are finding when they, employ the tool in their company?
So the first thing you want to look at when you're looking at a tool like this is kind of what's your end game? What's your core objective? And so the first thing we tend to look at is actually not an outcome, but it's just simply a question of how much of the learning and training is being absorbed. And so if you're trying to build, for example, like an L&D tool and you have some training available, the question becomes what percentage of the employees are like engaging in this training? And Happy's got really, really high levels of engagement. So for example, if a company onboards Happy, we typically retain about 93 to 94% of the employees continue to get coaching at the 90-day mark. So this is a very, very high percentage. And so it shows they're getting like meaningful and actual value. And so, you kind of want to use that as kind of your first indicator, which is like, what kind of consumption am I getting? Because for example, if you'd run a workshop, an in-person workshop that's one day, the question
Mhm.
would be 90 days later, how much information was retained,
Yeah.
right? And so with Happy, we're trying to figure out the same thing, right? Which is the employee still engaging in the content? What are they doing with it? What are the meaningful outcomes? So one of the other questions that we ask in our surveying is, if you're a leader or a manager, we ask, have you been able to apply anything that you've learned from Happy that's meaningful in the course of your day-to-day role?
Mhm.
And we're in like the 85% range. So, of managers that are using it, they're finding that they're able to apply it in a meaningful way. I think ultimately where we'd like to be, I mean, we're still a 2-year-old business, but I think where we'd like to be is eventually be able to map this to things like retention over time,
Yeah.
which is when you have when you get continuous coaching and you've improved your work relationships, like what kind of meaningful change does that make to retention?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think
And
those are not things that are going to be answered in the near term. Like that's probably like a 1 to 3 year
for
study.
sure. Yeah. And I think there's probably, and I don't know what they call this, but like a job satisfaction survey too, right? Like
Yeah.
just this kind of idea of not just they stick around, because the people who don't stick around, they're fed up, right? But then
Right.
there's these people in the middle that we can re-engage, right? That we can win back, as opposed to letting them go out to the over and done with it group of people. So
Well,
uh,
yeah. I mean, you want to keep your best people, right? And the thing is that manager and employee relationships are complicated. And,
yeah,
I've really, one of the things I've really been fascinated with is with this idea that like you can have a high performer, but they may have the wrong boss and they might be on the wrong seat on the bus. Could be either or both. And so, one of the things is that let's fix the low-hanging fruit first. And it's one of the things that I talk to CEOs a lot about, or business owners when they're looking at happy is, I mean, sometimes people leave and it's actually a win because, the culture of the organization is getting to the point to where high performers do not typically like low performers. And low performers do not typically like working with high performers. And so part of changing the culture of your business is you're going to have some changeover. It's just going to happen. If as you engage your high performers, they're going to make life uncomfortable for the low performers. And so sometimes you can't just look at retention as just a watermark. You've
sure.
got to look at, are you retraining those people that you consider high performer key employees?
Yeah.
So I like to look at retention overlaid with, 9 boxes are a bit controversial, but let's just say identifying your higher performers. And are you retaining the high performers? And are you maybe doing a healthy job of getting out the people that don't have alignment with the organization or aren't performing for whatever reason?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
more important to me than just a retention number.
Yeah. And so again, metaphors jump to my head. It's like you're working on your poker hand, right? And it's draw poker. And sometimes you got to get rid of cards to get better cards in there, right? And make that hand better. So yeah, just measuring staying, I can see how that's not really an efficient thing. It's the overall entity when you're done, right? Is it more high performing, better culture? And then maybe in the future, yeah, retention can, once it's
Well,
kind of,
you know that as a CEO yourself, right? I mean, that's the thing is that when you go hire somebody, you're trying to think through, of course, you're thinking optimistically about getting the best outcome, but hiring's hard. Hiring is hard, and not every hiring decision is going to be spot on. And frankly, one of the things I like to talk a lot about is that you can't also assume that life is all roses for the employee. I mean, sometimes change is good.
mm-hmm.
And, you have people that are out of alignment with the organization and they might say, this job doesn't speak to me anymore, or this role isn't for me, or this isn't getting the best. And them deciding to move on is actually a win.
Yeah.
So, I do think retention is critical, but the question is, let's qualify that, and
Yeah.
making sure that we've created an environment to retain our best performers.
Yeah, exactly. It's got to be a fit for both parties, right? Employee and employer.
Yeah,
Hey,
absolutely.
James, thanks so much for coming on. Where can people reach out to you, if they want to connect? I know you mentioned the Happy website, but where do you hang out for socials and that sort of thing?
LinkedIn. I'm accessible, and if you want to talk people or leadership, I would love to message with you.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much for coming on. Very easy to talk to. This was very loved having you on. It was a pleasure. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Enjoyed it.
Awesome. And to all of our listeners, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Engaging Personalities. And until next time, you know what to do. Stay engaged. Thank you so much for listening to Engaging Personalities. If you believe this world needs more engagement and you're an industry leader or you have an interesting take on rehumanizing business, go to go.engagify.ai/podcast-guest to apply and come on the show. If you got something out of this interview, do you mind sharing it on your social media? Just grab a quick screenshot with your phone and text it to a friend or post it on the socials. If you know someone that would be a great guest, tag them on social media to let them know about the show. Include the hashtag engaging personalities. I love seeing your posts and guest suggestions. We are regularly putting out new episodes and content. To make sure you don't miss any episode, go ahead and subscribe. Your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show and mean a lot to me and my team. Want to know more? Go to our website, engageify.ai, or follow me on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and stay engaged.